to another episode of the Daily Objective. Today it's gonna be me again. Morgan was supposed to be on today, but he apparently got like a really bad cough and he cannot talk. So I hope he gets well soon and hopefully he'll be on show back soon. And today joining me is Mark Pellegrino, an actor mainly known for his role as Randy in the 1989 Hulk Hogan movie No Holds Barred. Hey Mark, how you doing?
You just fucking busted my balls. I'll be damned. All right. This is war, my friend. This is war.
I This idea came up like 5 minutes ago because you mentioned it a couple of days ago that you were in the movie.
Very
But
good, my friend.
today we're gonna talk about well, the story that we're gonna talk about is a specific monument found in Gaza that was destroyed. But we'll talk about the whole idea of monuments in general later. But let me just quickly give you like a rundown of the news. Oh, and it's also day 123 of the war in Israel. So Hamas erected a monument commemorating the martyrs responsible for an attack in 2014, which killed two IDF soldiers. Just quickly quoting what is exactly on the monument, it says, "This land embraced the progress of the Nakba combatants in the direction of the occupying army's facilities. The combatants prevailed over the officers and the soldiers of the 188th Lightning Brigade, causing casualties and injuries among them. In commemoration of the Jihad March in the light of the exemplary footsteps of the combatants and as the sign of honor to the martyrs, these are their names." So, Mark, what do you think about this monument? What did you think about it when you first saw it?
I think blowing it up was the best possible thing they could have done. If there's something worse that you can do than blowing it up, that would be even better. But blowing it up, stomping on it, driving a tank over the rubble that remains so that it's crushed into dust, even possibly digging a hole in the ground and replacing it with a monument to the Israeli soldiers who were killed by the actions of these horrible religious fanatic pan-Arabist nationalist creeps would be even better.
So there are actually few things. Actually, first let me quote what the soldiers have said. Basically, one soldier was going through Gaza and he saw the monument and he recognized the number. It had the Arabic numeral 188. He didn't speak Arabic. He just recognized it was the same company he's in. So he got someone to translate it and he learned what it is. After he learned it, he said this has to be destroyed. And he said such a monument could not be allowed to stand, and thus we took decisive decision to destroy it. This signifies our unwavering commitment to pursue every cursed terrorist and reclaim every inch of land that has been tainted by the presence of Hamas militants. Uh, so I think it's really great to see whenever, yeah, they found such like these are not like monuments like you would have, in the US, you know, signifying, let's say, the destruction of Nazis or conquering Japan, destroying dictators. This is a monument to terrorists, to literal terrorists who go into Israel and try to basically destroy all of it.
I think the closest phenomenon in the United States that we have that people could understand are monuments to Confederate soldiers and Confederate generals. Of course, I'm in complete sympathy with taking down those monuments, not by mobs, but of course by plebiscite and by proper means, so there's no force involved. But certainly the idea that you put a statue up to a person who actually not only rejected the concepts that the United States are based on, but fought for them and killed other human beings in order to try to make that ideal come to pass. That's pretty despicable. And now you magnify that, which is already awful, by 1,000 with this religious fanaticism and this nihilistic, drive to just destroy the good for being good. And you have these monuments in a nutshell, and they should all be torn down,
Yeah,
and
this is
poured on top of the Hamas leadership's head before they get hanged or whatever the hell they're going to do to them.
And this is definitely not any type of one-time occurrence. I looked up, and there have been many instances like that in the past, and not just in the Gaza, but in the moderate West Bank. One thing I found, apparently Yasser Arafat even has a whole mausoleum and a whole museum dedicated to him, which is actually what is on the thumbnail of
Bomb
the
it.
picture.
Bomb it. Are they
Uh,
bombing it? Is there plans to bomb
well,
it?
it's in the West Bank, so
Bomb
uh,
it.
specifically, I believe it's in the Ramallah. So at least not yet.
Yeah, people have to realize that this guy was one of the biggest scumbags on earth, and not just because he kept the conflict alive for power, but this guy secreted away over $1 billion into a bank account so that he could have the high life in Paris. I think his wife lived in Paris, lived the high life in Paris while he was, refusing peace deal after peace deal after peace deal after peace deal to keep the Middle East in conflict. Complete and total scumbag. And there is rumors that he was a pedophile as well, and I think those are probably true.
That would be probably the least of my worries when it comes to Yasser Arafat, although it wouldn't surprise to me. I mean, the whole religion was founded basically by the guy who did the same thing, but that's enough. We actually haven't, during this whole conflict, we actually haven't talked that much about Islam specifically. Uh, it might warrant an episode to do about that. But one thing I wanted to mention, have you heard about the Martyrs Fund?
Oh no, tell me.
Oh, you don't know about it. Okay,
Mm,
so when it comes to if you don't believe and not just the government, but the Palestinians themselves have this basically reverence uh, for terrorists, literal terrorists. I mean, they call them martyrs. How more reverent can you get? Uh, I'm really surprised. So we made an episode about Martyrs Fund in the past, but basically it's a system of where the Palestinian, well, government, let's say, will pay the families of the terrorists by the number of Jews they kill. And this is not some Hamas program. I believe Hamas has its own thing, but this was started by the moderate Palestinian Authority. This was started in 1964. Uh, in some cases, it was stopped for like a couple of years, but it's still ongoing, and they are still getting paid. They are paid by basically how good they are at killing Jews.
yeah, but the society isn't pathological, and it's a collective punishment to be attacking them while we're attacking Hamas. I mean, come on. Come on. If you don't see the writing at the wall at this point, you don't want to see the writing at the wall at this point. Now, Daniel, I'm mad. I'm mad. I started off not mad, and now I'm mad.
Well, unfortunately, episodes like this are always gonna end up like that. If you wanna be even more mad, we actually on the reality show we're gonna talk about Unra again, and specifically the panel that was set up by that was set up to investigate Unra, and basically the people on the panel on one, oh, let me just make sure to pull it out so I can quote it exactly. The review panel is made up of people who believe Israel has committed genocide, and apparently there is also a September 11th denier on the panel as well.
Unbelievable. Now that's just unbelievable. Can this show be sent to Owen? What's his face? Who's that jack off?
Owen Jones, we
Owen
haven't mentioned
Jones.
him yesterday, so
Uh, no, I don't think Rossi would have him on the show, but there's got to be a way we can have him on the show and just dogpile him. Do you know the term dogpile?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great? Can we please have him on the show?
Well, maybe he can be one of the people you bring up for your. Or what are you planning to call your show about
I
beating
don't
up
know yet. I
politicians?
don't have a title, but it could be politicians and pundits like anti-Semites, like how to deal with them, how to choke them out under different situations. So I'm going to need help with it, of course, because I'm only a mere white belt. So I'm going to have to bring my buddies in who can come up with cool scenarios.
Um,
But
Sounds
it's going to
good.
be fun. It's in my head. It's in my head, and now I just have to make it happen.
So one more thing I want to mention about specifically like this destruction of monuments, and basically how I think it really it is basically symbolic. By destroying them, you're not really achieving any military goal, but I think it gives such a fuel, not just to the your side of basically your soldiers when you have that moment of like taking down the monument. And the one example I always bring up is when the Revolutionary Army took down the monument of King George and basically melted it down for bullets, for musket bullets. It's one of
Yes.
the greatest story. Another thing that came up to me is I think there's the real famous video of the statue of Saddam Hussein being taken down.
Yes.
Um,
That has a very powerful effect on the morale of the people doing it, for sure. They did the same thing on the Charles River in the Czech Republic. There was a big statue of Stalin right outside my hotel room, um, that they tore down, and they put in its place some kind of like perpetual clock that was kind of cool. But that had to make them feel good, right? To tear down that monster statue. Monster's dead.
I mean, yeah, and tearing down of the Berlin Wall. There are many examples like that. Uh, but the reason why things like this is important is to show up that the battle is against as we always say, it is against the Palestinian people themselves. It's not, we cannot even stress this point more. It's not just Hamas. It's never just Hamas. We've seen Palestinians themselves going into Israel, taking hostages themselves, holding hostages themselves, participating in the atrocities.
Yeah, we've seen them stabbing people, running them down, jumping out of their cars and hacking people to death with meat cleavers, blowing themselves up in cafes. And let's face it, you don't get 250 miles of tunnels underneath a space as small as Gaza without the help of the citizenry. You can't store munitions in schools, mosques, and hospitals without the help of the citizenry. And if you don't believe this is the case, if you think this is just some kind of Zionist conspiracy, well, just look at all the videotape they took celebrating on October 7th. There wasn't just a couple of people. There wasn't like a lot of people, terrified and horrified at what happened, and then other than just a few people celebrating and partying. It was the entire city. Just look at it. Thousands of people. Well, okay, now we're seeing where that idea takes them.
Yeah, they clearly don't want for Israel existing next to them. I mean, we've seen that. I mean, even before Hamas, Israel was basically occupying, mm, you could say, Gaza for I believe about 40 years, basically since 68. Uh, because no one wanted them, because Egypt didn't want to take it back. Egypt was taking basically controlling Gaza before that. They didn't want them back. No one wants them. Israel had to took over because there was no one else to take it, and they were still making problems. And after Israel finally get out, did they take over what Israel left behind and establish some kind of I think I saw a post by Jeroen Brook talking about this. Did they establish some kind of Gaza Rivieras? Did they set up hotels? Did they set up a great destination? I mean, they are right next to Mediterranean Sea. No, they took down everything that was left by the Jews and started attacking Israel days, if no, just
They've got some of the best beachfront property in the world, in one of the most exotic places in the world. And instead of building that up, the douchebags went and built tunnels and tried to kill Jews. I mean, you can't get any more stupid than that. That's a Darwin Award level offense, and they're experiencing the Darwin Awards now.
yeah. And I just saw a story. Apparently, a couple of Iranian spies were just deported from, I'm thinking maybe Sweden or Norway, that were acting as Afghani refugees, and they were in those nations just to kill Jews, not to kill specific people, not to kill some sort of Zionists that support Israel from some other nations, just specifically to kill Jews. I mean, how more collectivistic, how more evil can you get?
There is a group of objectivists right now that are out there. They're led by some douchebag who thinks he's super smart. that are anti-Zionists because they say Zionism is a collectivist ideology, and for objectivists to either claim they're Zionists or back Zionism in principle is a contradiction in terms. It's anti-individualistic. And they say the actual solution is to just treat people as individuals and not to promote this concept of Zionism at all. And some of these people are even going further. There's I don't know if this is new or not, but they're starting to trace the hostilities between the Germans and the Jews to an actual phenomenon where I guess the Jews attempted to pull one European power into the war. I don't remember whether they tried to pull a European power into the war against the Kaiser in World War I, or they convinced the power to stay out, which made the Kaiser and the Germans vulnerable. And Hitler knew this historical precedent, and that was what fueled his animus towards the Jewish people.
Yeah, isn't that what cultural Bolshevism is? The idea that I believe that originates with Hitler talking about Jews, that they both support they would both support the communism and capitalism on all sides, just so everyone would fight and they would somehow benefit from all of that. I'm really surprised that any objectives would actually go for this basically conspiracy theory.
Don't be. It's an objectivist who thinks he's smarter than even Rand herself. He thinks he's integrated all the principles better than everybody else. So he's an extreme narcissist and impossible to talk to. He even thinks he knows stuff about acting until I schooled him in that. But clearly, I mean, there are people out there that are thinking this and think they're rational, and it's a little disturbing. So we should actually have a show about, if we haven't already, Zionism, what it means, separate the stuff that we like about it out of the more tribalistic elements of it, and why it's not an indecent philosophy for persecuted people to follow.
So we might make one more episode about that. We actually had episode somewhat about that. It's when Raqqa came back for a one-time show. The name of the episode is "Am I a Zionist?" I'll put it into description and the comment section after the show. But it's definitely an interesting topic because I think you can make somewhat of a case for both sides. Like, yeah, we shouldn't have any nations basically just based on national identity or some sort of collective ethnic background just because you're Jewish, you should have a nation or something. But you also have to recognize there is something unique about the Jewish people, that whenever they went, they were prosecuted. And even in the most enlightened, in the most Western nations, they still couldn't be perfectly safe. I mean, we even see it now. The most I cannot remember the specific stat, but I believe James Valiant had a video about it on the Briefly Objective, that the most hate crime in America is committed against Jews, and not per capita, but in total.
In total, and we are the most tolerant nation with respect to Jews. That's why we have the second highest population of them. People forget that they were murdered and kicked out of France. They were murdered and kicked out of England. They were murdered and kicked out of Spain. They were murdered and kicked out of Russia and Eastern Europe.
Just
everywhere.
just in my country, Slovakia, if you go to my town that is close by, which only has like a couple tens of thousands of people, it's not a big city. It has a synagogue. We used to have one of the biggest Jewish communities in basically Eastern Europe. Well, if you don't count Poland, which had the biggest one. Uh, and what happened to it?
Decimated. Decimated. Yeah. So there is, and I don't know why these people don't take in the unique problems that Jews have had to face for millennia,
Yeah,
and
actually,
why they don't understand that it's completely reasonable for them to want a space where they can legally defend themselves.
and just one more very much like a personal example that I had in the past when it comes to anti-Semitism. During my civics class in high school, we had like a questionnaire that was basically talking about discrimination, and everyone in the class had to answer, would you be comfortable living next to, and it had like, you know, uh, some professions, I don't know, banker, policeman, and some ethnicities. So like Ukrainian, Ruthenians, Polish people, Jews, Romani people. And one thing you have to realize, Romani people are still very much discriminated in Slovakia and very much still like hated. Or there's like almost like a subtle racism. And actually, I believe only I and me and one more person in my class out of 30 people were comfortable living next to Jews. And this is something that I've never heard anyone talk about Jews in like that class. But when I like saw these statistics, I was like amazed. There is something I mean specifically even in my language, when you say someone is acting like a Jew or being Jewish, it's like a really bad insult.
I mean, we have that in America too. I haven't heard it in decades and decades, but it's supposed to be the equivalent of you're cheap.
Uh, it's something similar in here. Uh, but let me quickly get to super chats because we only have about 5 minutes left. So we have a super chat from Apollo Zeus saying memories of Tiny Lister Jr. Rest in peace. Do you know who that is?
Yes, Tiny Lister played Zeus in the aforementioned No Holds Barred. He was the main
Oh,
enemy. He was Hulk Hogan's enemy, or I should say, what was Hulk Hogan's name? I keep thinking of Thunder Lips, but that's in Rocky. It's something else. What was it? Rip, something like that. I don't remember what his name. Anyway, he was my brother's nemesis.
oh, interesting. We also have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. A super chat from Frank. He says, "Can statues knocked down by Antifa be justified?" So I think as long the problem with statues is, I mean, they should all be privately held. You shouldn't have like public because yeah, that makes it really problematic. There's one thing someone privately putting up a statue of some Southern war veteran or something. I mean, we can like disagree with it, but at the end of the day, it's like his decision. But when you have it at like a government building, that makes it. I can almost sympathize with like some people, going and taking out something that is held as a public property that commemorates Southern veterans, I would say. What do you
Wait, so
think
what do
about
you
that?
what are you what are you saying?
I can to some extent understand like people taking down statues that are like publicly held. I would never justify like privately held ones.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, I understand it to a degree, but I think it should be done under a certain process. So of course there's no violence involved. But then again, that contagion extended to all kinds of other historical figures that it shouldn't have. So they were mad about Lincoln. They wanted to tear down a statue that was commissioned by freed slaves. It showed Lincoln as a liberator simply because they didn't like the physical positions of the slaves. It seemed subservient. And so they wanted to tear that down. And I believe Frederick Douglass was at the commemoration of that statue. I mean, that's an important statue. They want to tear down statues of all of the founders who held slave, irrespective of the kinds of ideas that they promoted, ideas that eventually ended up being the philosophical and intellectual weight that made slavery despicable in the eyes of the world. You can't tear down a statue of Thomas Jefferson. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. So they went stupid. But you know, I could see Confederate officers who were fighting for that cause. Yeah, I could see it. I can understand it because it represents anti-Americanism. But even the people tearing down those statues don't see those people as being anti-American. They probably see them as being the penultimate Americans that they're trying to take, you know, bring down.
Yeah, one of statues that I always like to see when I come to London is the statue of Winston Churchill, and it's probably one of the most violated statues that are on that square. You can half the time it's probably covered in some graffitis or.
That's shameful.
We also have a super chat from Michael. Thank you so much. He says Israel will prevail while the Palestinians are on their knees. Let's hope so. And thank you, Jonathan, for your super chat. Okay, Mark, any last words before we wrap up and I mention the reality show?
Yeah, I mean, any more monuments or statues that they find like that, they should wipe out. Any murals they find dedicated to martyrs, they should cover over or blow the walls down. Any streets named after martyrs, they should pick the street signs up and throw them in the garbage or burn them. The martyrdom for their cause is evil, is demonic, and it needs to be obliterated entirely.
Sounds about right. Just a real quick last super chat question from Apollo Zeus, and I think it's for you, Mark. Do you do online acting lessons?
Sure, why not? But it's a little weird to learn acting online. I think acting is an up close and personal thing. You gotta learn by being physical, you know, in the physical space of the other person.
Okay, last thing from me, we have the reality show upcoming in about 15 seconds. It's gonna start, and we're gonna talk about the Unra basically setting up an investigation for themselves, and it's gonna be done by themselves. So I'm really hoping they'll find out very insightful things.
Lovely.
Thank you, Mark, for joining me. Thank you, everyone,
Thanks.
and bye bye.
Peace.